Yeah.
Find out the name this
Okay.
afternoon.
I want to kind of go through this. I gave you a lot of the passages, but I want to sort of go through a little quicker so we can get to the connection with Advent to understand this is the time period really spoken of by Advent. On page 4, I give you a quote from Lamentations at the top, just acknowledges they've sinned, and that's why they're in the state they're in. And then right in the middle, you have another one from Baruch, the book of Baruch. And he mentions in that middle section, he says, even today the evils cling to us, the curse the Lord pronounced to Moses. So that's the curse, exile. Now, Baruch is writing this when he's back in the Holy Land. He's back. But they still feel like they're in exile. Now, why do they feel like that? Well, what had happened a few hundred years before... Okay, so 586 is when the temple's destroyed and the exile happens.
Right.
One of Babylon's own tributary states, Media, which is called Persia today, Persians, they actually successfully stage a coup and take over the Babylonian Empire. And the Babylonian king, the Persian king allows the Jews to return to exile, or return from exile in 515 BC. So roughly 70 years, and that's why that 70 number is so symbolic, one of the reasons to Israel. They're allowed to return. But even upon returning, they still feel like they're in exile. In other words, God hasn't really restored much. And so you can see this in some of the later books. Just really quick, the fact, that's the point, is God is not present. There's no Ark of the Covenant. That's destroyed or gone. The temple is rebuilt, but it's a shadow of its former self. There's no king who's Davidic. And most of all, there are no prophets. So, for example, here's an example near the bottom of page 4. The book of Maccabees discusses what Jews today celebrate as Hanukkah. And after they are able to liberate the temple and the city of Jerusalem, well, one of the altars has been desecrated. And they don't know what to do with it. So look what happens. It says, they deliberated what ought to be done with the altar for burnt offerings that had been desecrated. They decided it best to tear it down, lest it be a lasting shame to them that the Gentiles had defiled it. So they tore down the altar. They stored the stones in a suitable place on the Temple Mount until the coming of a prophet who could determine what to do with them. Right? They're lost. Israel's lost. God's not speaking to them.
Mm-hmm.
2 more examples real quick. If you follow that at the end of page 4, carrying over to 5. There was a great tribulation in Israel, the like of which had not been since the time the prophets ceased to appear. And then just a few more lines down. The Jewish people and their priests had decided the following. Simon will be their leader and high priest forever until a trustworthy prophet arises. So basically, Israel's going blind in the dark. God refuses to speak to them. So they're still in sin. They're still in exile. Nothing has really changed. They need to actually have a prophet. And the earlier prophets always told you about the Davidic king, right? So many of the prophecies of the prophets has to do with the coming king, the Messiah. Well, now there's no prophet. The book of Daniel sort of captures it all together, what Israel's feeling was, right in the middle of page 5 here, the bold part. We have in our day no prince, that's no king, prophet or leader, no burnt offering, sacrifice, oblation, or incense, no place to offer first fruits to find favor with you. So everything seems lost. Now let's backtrack just a little bit. The last prophet ceased to speak right around the time when Israel is being returned. The very last one is Malachi. That's why he ends the Old Testament. And they do try to encourage Israel. But the prophet of the exile, the great prophet of the exile, the priest Ezekiel, who was a priest and then is called a prophet, and away from his own land, away from his temple, he prophesies. And he tells that there's going to be this special, that there's going to be the time that's coming. So at the top of page 6, they'd already been told that there would come a time that their sins would be forgiven. We actually just read this, I think, today at Daily Mass. Comfort, give comfort to my people, says your God. Speak to the heart of Jerusalem. Proclaim to her that her service, that is her slavery, she's in exile, has ended. Her guilt is expiated. She has received from the hand of the Lord double for all her sins. A voice proclaims, in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Sound familiar for Advent? Okay. So that's already a prophecy. But to be honest, the Jews don't believe it. I mean, think about it. They're slaves in a country. They're basically like they were a combination of where Abraham began and when they were enslaved in Egypt. They're in a foreign land. They have nothing. And so a prophet arises, Ezekiel, who gives and promises there will be 3 events, and then this restoration will be complete. And so at the bottom, just look at the bold part. Here's what God tells them through Ezekiel. I will take you away from all the nations, gather you from all the lands, and bring you back to your own soil. I will sprinkle clean water over you to make you clean from all your impurities, and from all your idols I will cleanse you. I will give you a new heart and new spirit, and a new spirit I will put within you. I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. I'll put my spirit within you so that you may walk in my statutes, observe my ordinances, and keep them. So 3 things he says. God through Ezekiel says, look for 3 signs. Now notice Abraham was given 3 promises. Now they're starting over from exile, same place as Abraham, 3 promises. The first, you'll be returned to your own land. Then there'll be some water purification ritual. Jews have a lot of water purification rituals, but it's kind of unclear. But it's clear the prophet, God is telling you through the prophet, when you see it, you'll know. And then the third one, I'm going to give you my own spirit. I'm not just going to give my spirit to this prophet or this king. I'm going to give it to you all. So there's the 3 signs. Now, when Israel first hears this prophecy in Babylon, what do you think their reaction is? Whatever, dude, right? Whatever. Kind of forget we're not even in our own country. Well, 70 years, relatively short time. That's not even 2 Jewish generations as they understand it. This happens, and they find themselves back in their own land. And the fervor of Israel ignites, and it will stay ignited till about the year 100 AD. It's called Second Temple Judaism. You have more writings from that period. It is probably the most religious period of Jewish history ever, this period, because they've seen firsthand the first sign. And so it happens so quickly in their mind that things, it's got to be quick. And so they start to wait, and they're so excited. And they wait. And they wait. And they wait. 400 years. And then we start with this, right in the middle, page 7. As it is written in Isaiah the prophet, behold, I am sending my messenger ahead of you. He will prepare your way. A voice of one crying out in the desert, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight his paths. John the Baptist appeared in the desert proclaiming a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. Now, we're told it's the Jordan River. So suddenly, after 400 years, a man appears in the same place that Elijah was taken up from heaven, the bank of the River Jordan, wearing the same clothing. And what's he doing? He's telling people he'll pour water on them and forgive their sins. The second sign. 400 years they've waited. So when it says people of the whole Judean countryside and all the inhabitants were going out to him and were being baptized, that's not an exaggeration. Right? He was more famous than Jesus in his time period. Way more. The Romans mention him. The Jews mention him. He's all over the place. Because for 400 years, they had awaited the return of a prophet. Why do we have 4 weeks of Advent? 400 years between Malachi and not Jesus, John. And what does John proclaim? The coming Messiah. The one who's greater than him. That's Advent. That's Advent. It is not, except for the last few days, about baby Jesus. That's why all the teachings, John is the main figure over these next 4 weeks. He has in more of the readings than anyone else, including Mary. All the teachings so far, think of the first 2 weeks we've gone through, they're all about judgment and Jesus coming. There's nothing about babies and things like this. And so that's what everything converges on. So look what the church says about Advent, and it's on page 8. I have 2 paragraphs from the church. First about John. St. John the Baptist is the Lord's immediate precursor or forerunner sent to prepare his way. Prophet of the Most High, John surpasses all the prophets, of whom he is the last. He inaugurates the gospel, already from his mother's womb, welcomes the coming of Christ, and rejoices in being the friend of the bridegroom, whom he points out as the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Going before Jesus in the spirit and power of Elijah, John bears witness to Christ in his preaching, by his baptism of conversion, and through his martyrdom. John is, if you were to sort of draw a line, and you have the Old Testament and the New, in terms of the Old Covenant and the New, notice who John is. Although it's been 400 years, who is John? He's the last of the prophets. So where does that put him?
Old Testament.
Old Testament. He ends the Old Testament. Mary begins the New. Mary. In fact, we do this, Eastern Catholics and Eastern Orthodox, whether you're a church or an individual person, if you actually practice and know the practice, when you buy icons to pray from, the first one must always be Christ Pantocrator. Boom. The second one is always Mary. She goes on his right hand of Jesus, so facing him. So she'd actually be reversed, facing him. And who's the third one you have to buy? John. He reminds us of the old. Think of what Jesus says. There is no one greater born of woman than John the Baptist. But the least in the kingdom of God is greater than he. The allusion to who John is. And as the church points out, he's the end. You know, Islam claims the thing about the last prophet being Muhammad. Well, that's the last prophet. 400 years they wait for their last word, Israel, before the Messiah. He's there, but he's not only a prophet, notice he's a precursor. What does that mean? That means everything he does is already a pointer to what Jesus will do. Even down to their births, right? They both are born miraculously. Jesus more miraculously from a virgin, but John is born from a woman who can't have children, who's elderly. He's commissioned in the womb. He's already filled with the Spirit from the womb, we're told in the Bible. And what does he do? Well, he proclaims the gospel. Jesus proclaims the gospel. He baptizes people. Jesus initiates baptism. He dies, killed by the Jewish authorities. Jesus dies, killed by the authorities. Right? In everything, he's literally the way. He's the one preparing the way of Jesus. And so the next one, which is a smaller paragraph now on Advent. When the church celebrates the liturgy of Advent each year, notice this is the very next paragraph, 524, that one was 523, so these go together. When the church celebrates the liturgy of Advent each year, she makes present this ancient expectancy of the Messiah. For by sharing in the long preparation for the Savior's first coming, the faithful renew their ardent desire for his second coming. That's what Advent's about. That's the primary reason for it. By celebrating the precursor's birth and martyrdom, the church unites herself to his desire. He must increase, but I must decrease. And so Advent is a time of preparation, expectant hope, anticipation of the coming Messiah. And that's why the colors and everything change. And out of the wealth of symbols I could have chosen, I just picked 3. The Jesse tree. A real Jesse tree looks like a tree. And for each day from December 1st to December 24th, there's a new symbol representing some member of Jesus' genealogy that you place on the tree. Now, why is it Jesse tree? Why is it Jesse? Who's Jesse? Jesse's David's father. So it's the line of the Davidic kings down to Jesus. And that's from the 1st to the 24th. The famous creche, or the manger, that doesn't arise until the 1200s. St. Francis creates that. He's the reason we have animals in our manger scenes. Read the story. Yes, they lay the baby in a manger, but animals are never mentioned. That comes from St. Francis because the original one was live. Francis for his nuttiness, and he was nutty. They always wondered what he was going to do next. Sure enough, the poor town of, I think it was Foligno, but I don't recall exactly. Midnight, he starts ringing the bells. So the whole town empties out thinking for sure that the Moors, the Muslims, are coming to destroy them, right? Because that was an ever-present threat. You don't ring the bells of the town crazily at midnight. So they all come running out, find the brothers there, directing them to a stable where he had made a live manger scene. But it was just 2 people, a baby, and animals, nothing else. But that becomes what will later then be the creche. So now we have the manger scene. The problem about the creche, though, is that it combines in one symbol 3 different events which are totally disconnected in a sense. The shepherds occur the day of Jesus' birth. The Magi don't come for 2 years afterwards. They're not there at the same time. By the time the Magi come, they live in a house and such. It's clear. It says the house where they were. And the animals didn't have any part of it till the 1200s. So we've thrown together sort of this mishmash of all this stuff. I mean, we do cute things, right? Jesus doesn't appear till like Christmas Eve. Maybe you have the Magi way over here in the room. You move them a little closer each time. I mean, at least that's a little more accurate. But even the church, right? We have the Magi in front right now. Well, it's not true, right? That's the Christmas story. That's not the Bible story. And we have to recognize that those are different stories. But what's the big one? The big one's the Advent wreath. So let's look at the wreath. The circular wreath represents God without beginning, without end. The infinity of God. And notice that's what grounds the whole thing. So God is the grounding of this whole story. The greenery represents new life. So let me kind of point it out. Circle is God. The greenery is new life, right? I mean, the new life that Christ is bringing, the new creation. And so, I mean, what's the quote-unquote usual color that the priests wear?
Green.
Right, green during ordinary time, because it's the new life, it's the new creation. But this is the moment in preparation for what's coming forth. And it's looking forward to the final new creation in its totality. The little red berries or ribbons, and not all Advent wreaths have them, I know, but if they do, they represent the blood of Jesus. Because even as an infant, he was literally born to die. Everyone who is born will die, but Jesus was literally born to die. Hence the myrrh gift from the Magi and such. The 4 candles represent the 400 years of no prophet, or I should say until the coming prophet. So in other words, God's returning again, because by a prophet it means that the word of God is alive and active again. So it's really the return of God in the prophet. And of course, in the preparation of the Messiah. But that's the 4. That's why it's 4 weeks. It's 400 years. It has nothing to do with Jesus' birth. It has to do with the return of prophecy. The purple candles represent primarily royalty. That's the color royalty. I don't have pink because they may make them, but I don't have one, so orange. But the orange represents, that's always a symbol of joy. A lot of people don't know wedding gowns for ancient Israel were often pinkish colors of hues and such that they use. They're usually like a light red. And it's confusing to us because words have changed meaning. The word scarlet in the ancient world meant purple. Today it means red. But it was purple in the ancient world. when it says Lydia was a merchant of purple, it literally says she's a merchant of scarlet. But we have to make it clear what that means. So you have Christ the King. The third week, Gaudete Sunday with the pink, not orange, but the pink one, is simply just that we're almost there. It's almost the time. So all the readings reflect joy. What we've lost since Vatican II is Advent is penitential, like Lent. Now, if you think about it, you know that, right? Because we don't sing the Gloria, like at Lent. And we have Advent penance services. But we kind of forget on a daily basis, Advent is supposed to be as penitential as Lent. Why? Again, not because we're waiting for baby Jesus, but because we're waiting for the judge in glory at the second coming, not the first. And I better be ready for that when he comes. And so the focus of Advent really has to do with this. And then on the last day, the big white candle is placed in the middle, which will last until Epiphany. And that represents Jesus, his purity, the light of the world. These are the light of the Gentiles as it's approaching the time of the Messiah and the prophets. And so the Advent wreath kind of in one symbol really characterizes and encompasses most of what the season of Advent is actually about. But even further to prove that, I mentioned Advent begins the church year, so you start a whole new cycle of readings. Well, look at the readings. I mentioned them here on page 9. The first Sunday's readings are about Jesus exhorting us to be awake for his coming. Second and third Sunday, the preaching of John the Baptist calling us to repent as we prepare for the Lord's coming. Notice none of those three have anything to do with his birth. They all have to do with the Messiah, the glory. Only on the fourth Sunday, the last one, which this year is Christmas Eve. So remember that, because you have to go to 2 masses that weekend, unless you're going Christmas morning, right? I feel bad for the priest that day, right? Sunday morning, they must do all 4 masses for the fourth Sunday of Advent and do the 3 Christmas ones at night.
Yeah.
They are not the same mass. If you go in the morning, you still got to go to Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. That weekend is both, so it's the fourth Sunday. But notice, not until the last day, the last week, do we even mention the birth. Only now, when it's literally a week away. The vast majority of the readings, and I point out, in the daily missal, even the weekday readings, out of the 28 days, 20 have to do with Jesus coming in judgment. Only 8 total speak of his birth as a child. So the focus of Advent is not primarily the baby Jesus. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. In fact, it's a very good image, especially for younger kids, and it teaches us something about God's humility to come in a frail, helpless form, the one who's God Almighty, who depends on human beings to take care of him. And so there's something to be said for that. But as adults, you and I need to balance that with what the real season means, the primary reason. And that is, how am I living my life in preparation for the Lord's coming, the real coming? When I die or when he comes again, how am I living that? This is a time of reflection. It's not as harsh a season of Advent or of penance as Lent is, but it should be something we're recalling and recognizing. And the reason why John is so important is because his prophecy has not been fulfilled. Look at the end on the last page. Here's what John tells them. Produce good fruit as evidence of your repentance. Even now the axe lies at the root of the trees. Therefore every tree that does not bear good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire. I am baptizing you with water for repentance, but the one, and notice repentance, so the time of Advent, but the one who is coming after me is mightier than I am not worthy to carry his sandals. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire. His winnowing fan is in his hand. He will clear his threshing floor, gather his wheat into his barn, but the chaff he will burn with unquenchable fire. None of that happened yet. Jesus came the first time, and John was so confused, he had to send word before he died to make sure he hadn't messed up. Remember? Are you the one? Mm-hmm. Or did I blow it? Why did John think he blew it? Because Jesus doesn't do this. It's mercy and peace and love. And that's true. But that's not the Jesus of Revelation, is it? When he does come. That's the Jesus of judgment and power and glory. So John has not been fulfilled, and that's why he's the Advent symbol, more so even than Mary. Mary's the Christmas symbol. He's the Advent symbol because we are preparing for Jesus coming in glory and judgment. Not that you have to be terrified, but you should actually be excited. Often we're not. That kind of shows where our heart really is. And I'm putting myself in that same category. But it's true, right? I mean, we're kind of like St. Augustine with his chastity talk. He's like, make me chaste, Lord, just not yet, right? That's us too. Thy kingdom come, but make sure I get everything done in my life I want to do, and maybe see my grandkids married in this, and then you can come, right? I want to get my stuff done, which shows us that's not really our main focus, is hoping the kingdom comes when everything will be renewed. We still kind of want to cling to our own little life here. And that's okay, right? I mean, none of us is perfect, and that's what we work on as we go through. But Advent's another time to kind of really focus on that, to remember that everything is going to be renewed, restored, a whole new creation, much greater than what Jesus has already brought. His incarnation was just the first step of something much greater. The second coming, when we finally are resurrected, when we now resemble Jesus inwardly and outwardly, when this whole world is renewed, restored, sins are completely forgiven forever, evil is destroyed, and everything is made perfect. That hasn't happened yet. That's what we await for in hope. And that's what Advent's about. And it's important that even as we're covering the infancy narratives, because we're in the season of Advent, that's why I gave you this whole otherwise random handout in the infancy story, because it's important that we as adult believers begin to balance ourselves. Again, I'm not saying we give up the Christmas stuff, the baby Jesus, that aspect of it. That's all has its own beautiful meaning and purpose, although technically that's more the Christmas season. But Advent really focuses on us on the final goal. Who are we as Christians? What do we say we're looking forward to? What are we claiming? What is our heritage? What are we waiting for? The way Israel waited 400 years for the return of the king, the prophets, and God, well, we've already waited over 2,000. But we're still supposed to keep waiting until that time, which only the Lord knows. Boom, everything's renewed. So not to lose heart. And Advent's that time to kind of renew yourself again, to kind of, like Lent, get prepared, do some spiritual exercise so you're not spiritually weak and flabby, So it's a time to kind of renew that. Questions about that?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, in the back.
When did they decide to put Christmas where it is now?
Christmas was placed on the calendar on the 25th very early, by at least the 200s on. It was done, however, with the full knowledge that that was not the date of his birth. That was known. It corresponds to the Roman god Mithras, who was very popular in Roman time period. And as I mentioned, Christmas for a long time it wasn't a big feast. It wasn't any different than most Sundays, except that this was the actual day of the Lord's birth. And so the church in those early days had no problem kind of just connecting it and making it easier for what had just been previously former pagans to sort of fall right into the same comfortableness of the same pattern of when the events occurred. So it comes about early, but even at that time, the church didn't claim it. We also have a difficulty that arises. Jews of the ancient world do not celebrate birthdays. They don't. In fact, the only people found celebrating birthdays in the Old Testament are evil Jews or pagans. King Herod celebrating his birthday when he has John's head cut off. Birthdays were not celebrated. And so only when it becomes in the 200s, when now the church is mostly Gentile and Romans and Greeks do celebrate birthdays, only then does anyone even care that there's a set date for Jesus' birth. Prior to that, the Jewish Christians will celebrate that he was born, but we don't need any specifics. Most likely he was born in March. People say because of the shepherd story, but that Israel has a 9-month shepherd period, so that's irrelevant. That doesn't help us at all. It's more better. We know when Herod died. We roughly know when these various censuses we brought up earlier occurred. We know when John the Baptist's ministry begins. We know how old Jesus roughly was when he started, and so we have a good idea. And then the idea that the Magi came within 2 years after his birth, so we know a good idea when he was born and what time period that would have had to have been between Herod's death, this event, and everything else. And it's March. What day? Nobody can guess that, but that's the most likely thing. Yeah.
What I found confusing is that you were talking about the second coming of Christ via the Advent calendar, and the second coming of Christ hasn't been realized yet, and the Advent calendar is a symbol prior to Christ's birth.
The Advent calendar or the Advent wreath?
I mean the Advent wreath.
No, the Advent wreath is actually the 4 weeks till the coming of John. That's why it just ends. And notice, even today, how long is Lent? 40 days, right? A little more. 40 days. How long is Easter season? 50 days. That's why till Pentecost, Penta 50. Advent is how long? 4 weeks. How long is Christmas?
12 days.
12 days. Right? Even on the calendar, it's the least important of the feasts. And even in that 12 days, what do? We mash together his birth, the Epiphany, and his baptism. Right? We jam 30 years into 12 days. And of those 12 days, only 3 are Sunday masses, roughly, depending how baptism falls in the dating. So it's still true to say that without, not denigrating Christmas, but it's true to say that Christmas is not the big focus of the church. Remember, 4 chapters out of the entire Bible even mention it. Paul never mentions Jesus' birth once, other than he was born of a woman, but he doesn't talk about how he was born. The other authors don't mention it. Mark doesn't mention it, and he's the earliest gospel writer. John just talks about the incarnation, but he doesn't actually tell us what happened. So really we only have 2 chapters of Luke and 2 chapters of Matthew to even give us any information. So part of it's just the fact that we don't have a lot of information. And as I mentioned, the second part just had to do with the church's tradition. Birthdays were not relevant, and the more important feast was always why Jesus came in the first place. So Christmas is important because it is the coming of the King in his incarnate form, but it's only, like I said, the first step of everything else. That's why even Advent is not focused primarily on him till the very end. Only the very last Sunday speaks of Jesus and Mary and Joseph. Only the last one in any cycle, A, B, or C. All the other weeks prior are all talking about judgment. Right? Go back, go on, if you don't have a missal, go online and look at the Sunday readings for all 3 cycles, A, B, and C. Look at what the gospel is. It has nothing to do with Jesus' first coming. It all has to do with his second one. And so that's what's really being prepared for, preparing for that. Now in that, we recognize his first coming as the start of this process, but Advent's actually it's not what most people assume it to be, even in the church's teaching. They didn't mention the baby, they mentioned vaguely. They said in recalling his past thing. How did the church put it? It says, back on page 8, it says, by sharing in the long preparation for the Savior's first coming, the faithful renew their ardent desire for his second coming. So the first coming is just a reminder of what Israel already faced, but it's to engage us to be in the same ardent, expectant hope for the second coming, not for just the remembrance of what the first one was. So the first coming is important, but it's really the least important of the feasts on the church's sort of main high liturgical calendar. I think the reason we're messed up is because in the Western world, Christmas has become the feast, right? Because you get presents. I know that. It's sad because I have relatives, who aren't believers, or at least don't care. They may be believers. And Christmas is always a big deal, right? We have to come to their house, and they have to give us 8,000 presents for my kids and stuff. And then Easter comes, and there's not a fight at all about whether we're coming or not. They don't care, right? And yet, but that shows you the mentality of the secular world. And to some extent, we've bought into it. You can understand as a kid, because getting presents is cool. But Easter's the focus. Easter. Christmas was so minor for most of its history. France is the one who makes it popular again by what he does. And he did it not because he had some deep devotion to the child Jesus. Francis's purpose for doing it was he believed the overall imagery of the humanity of Christ was being overshadowed a lot in his time period. In other words, people were so terrified of Christ because they saw him as the huge judge and God in glory that they kind of forgot the fact that he was a human being. They acknowledged it. I mean, yeah, he's human, but he wasn't really human to most people's minds. He was just God in this form. So even Francis's reason wasn't the baby Jesus. It was the incarnate Christ, what that means.
So then are you saying maybe the first coming of Christ was actually when he was raised from the dead? Because at that point they realized he was Christ. Other than that, they thought he was just a great prophet.
No, not necessarily. I mean, the Bible's clear that they understand the stories of the infancy narratives that we already see here and now, who Christ really is. That's why he has this double character. He's the son of David through Joseph, but he's the son of God in the divine sense through Mary. So even from the beginning, as the king, the Davidic Messiah, everything else is conjoined in him. That's clear. Both authors do it in different ways, Matthew and Luke, but they're both clear from the beginning who he is. That this is the one to be expected. This is the one who has come. So I wouldn't call it the first. I wouldn't call his resurrection the first coming. The resurrection and is actually his coronation. That's how the Bible speaks of it. When I am lifted up, I will draw all people to myself. And so it's the stages of kingship. The king is born. And remember, that's what the Magi asked. Where's the newborn king? Now they mess up. They call him the king of the Jews. That's a Gentile term. He would have been the king of Israel. Why do they call him the king of the Jews? Why is Herod the king of the Jews? Because that's what the Romans called them. That's why Jesus doesn't accept the title, although they put it over his head at the end. He's the king of the Jews, not of Israel. But everything he does sort of follows this same pattern. He's born, that's his kingship. He goes through his ministry of recalling his king to gather his kingdom back together. His passion, death, and crucifixion are when he's crowned. And it's not an accident they call it a crown of thorns. They could have just said they wove thorns around his head. There's a reason why the terminology is used by the gospel writers. So that's his crowning. And then he ascends to heaven to sit at the right hand in glory. So he's already king, but he was king from the beginning. His birth, he's born as king, he's crowned at a certain time, he takes his throne, and now we await for his return to make the king to proclaim his kingdom, to destroy the enemies and to make his kingdom perfect. So the whole story of Jesus, all the things we celebrate, the birth, the passion and death, the resurrection, the ascension, which kind of gets forgotten, but it's very important, and ultimately then his second coming. And we don't have a feast for the second coming, so we kind of use the season. And then and remember, what was the last week of the old year prior to Advent? Christ the King. So it's kind of it's the end of him as king, but it's also leading right away into the very story of where his kingship on earth now starts. So, okay. So yes.
On the wreath, when did the church initiate that wreath or symbolism?
I want to say around the 500s or 600s is when it comes into play. Because, as I mentioned, Christmas wasn't a huge feast, so there was no need for any sort of prior time. And it first started very small. Advent was sort of 3 days of fasting and prayer right before Christmas. And then as time went on, they kind of expanded it. But I think it's the 500s or 600s that it finally emerges. But, culturally, it's funny because it's always been a symbol in the church, but individual wreaths, like at our home, like is so common today, at least in the United States, that wasn't always so common. That's much later and even now, today, that's still cultural. There's some cultures that they'd be like, why would you have a wreath in your own home, right? That's what the church does. So I have no idea when that started, when it became a more private family devotion as well as what is occurring in the church itself. Okay. Everybody looks shocked, so hope I didn't ruin Christmas, I'm just saying. Okay. Let me hand out, we can only just begin a few little words to the Annunciation. But I'll start by mentioning, if you think about it, even Lent's the same way, right? Lent doesn't actually lead us into the Passion in the true sense, because what does Lent represent? Jesus 40 days in the desert. When did that actually happen?
Right
Early in
before
his
he began
life,
his
right?
ministry.
It's separated from the crucifixion by 3 years. And yet, so the preparation time does not always correspond to an exact sort of match with the feast that it's going to celebrate at the end of that awaiting period. So that's just, the church is just trying to incorporate everything of Christ's life so we at least sacramentally experience it and liturgically. Now, yeah.
Okay, just before we go on to the new one, on your back page of the handout we're just putting aside is the Jewish and Christian
Oh,
Bibles.
yes.
Okay,
Thank you for bringing that up. I forgot about that. The reason I brought it, I even attached this, is we keep talking throughout all those passages, you kept saying the prophets, the prophets, the prophets, the prophets. You need to recognize how Israel understands prophets is not how you and I do. And that'll be important as we go into the New Testament, because Matthew will sometimes say he quotes a prophet, but it's like from the book of Samuel. And you and I go, right? Well, okay, so here's the Hebrew Bible, which is called the Tanakh. Hebrews love acronyms. Remember, there's no real vowels in Hebrew, but it's pronounced Tanakh. The acronym it's the 3 parts of their Bible. The Torah, which is the law, what we call the law, or the Pentateuch. The Nevi'im, which means prophet. And the Ketuvim, or Ketuvim, depending on how different people spell it, which means the writings. So that's the 3 parts of the Hebrew Bible. And that's the way that the New Testament authors refer to different parts of the Bible. You'll see them talking about the law and the prophets, or even the writings. They're understanding it from this type of background. But you'll notice when you look at we have that same basic thing, right? We have, in the Old Testament, we have the Torah, the law. We have the big section of prophets, and then we have that last section with the Psalms and everything else, sort of the writings. But when you actually get down to it, they understand it very differently. So the Torah is the law, but who traditionally is the author of the Torah, at least responsible? Moses. And Moses is the great prophet, right? Until a second one comes who God promises there'll never be another one like him. He's the greatest until, I guess, John and / Jesus. Then notice how they understand the prophets. They have the former prophets. Books that we consider to be history, they consider to be prophets. Mm-hmm. So notice, Jews consider Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, which for them is just one book each. Those are all prophets. They're not prophets for us. So we get confused when we see them quoting the prophets in the New Testament, and they're not our prophets. Then they have our prophets, which they call the later prophets, or the writing prophets. But notice they only have 4. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and then they mash the other 12 into one book called the Book of the 12. Mm-hmm. And then they have the final section, the writings. But you'll notice there are books that we wouldn't put in the writings, right? Ruth, we consider to be history. They put it in the writings. Lamentations, they take out of the prophets and put there. Daniel, they do not consider to be a prophet like we do, and they put him there. And notice Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles are just writings. They're not prophets. So it's difficult sometimes. It's not a major thing to worry about, but I only put that there because that whole handout is talking about the prophets, the prophets. What did they mean by that when they said no prophet has appeared? They mean there's no one writing scripture. There's no one proclaiming these things. There's no one like Moses. Nothing's going on. There's no inspiration happening. And then just for fun, I gave you the other ones, how Orthodox, Catholics, and Protestants divided up. This is only our Old Testament. Our New Testaments are mostly the same with a few variations among the Orthodox. But notice the way the Hebrews count it, they have 24 books, even though they have exactly the same number of books as Protestants count as 66 books. Mm-hmm. But they divide them differently and combine them differently. And then Catholics have 46 books and the Orthodox have 53. But not really, because they break chapters out of the books that are part of our 7, that they make their own book. So for instance, there at the bottom, you see Baruch, letter of Jeremiah, Susanna, Bel and the Dragon. Those are added. We have all those same books. They're just part of another book they're not separate. They're part of a bigger book. Susanna and Bel come from the book of Daniel in our version. But that's why, it's important to realize in the time of Jesus, remember, all the stuff is lost. There is no authority in Israel, no spiritual authority in the true sense. There's no king. There are no prophets. And the temple priesthood is, for the most part, kind of beholden to Rome at this point in their lives. And so the priest, prophet, king, that's gone. So, because people ask me, in classes here and when I teach at the institute and the junior colleges, I'll get the question a lot, which Bible did Jesus use? The question itself makes no sense in that time period because it's assuming something that's not true, and that is they had a Bible everyone read, and they didn't. The quote-unquote Hebrew Bible was read by some Palestinian Jews as it is right now. We have it, but not all. Many read the version that's the Orthodox/Catholic version, and that's the version the New Testament quotes for the Old Testament. Some had books that no one else believed in, but they did, but then they accepted some of the other books, like the Essenes and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Right? Some of the Dead Sea Scrolls are copies of these books. Others are ones nobody else reads. And whose version is right? Nobody's, because who can tell you what's Scripture? There is no authority. There is no authority. The Sadducees didn't believe anything was Scripture except the Torah. Many of them were priests. The Pharisees had different interpretations based on which school, Hillel or Shammai, they belonged to. You know who decides what the Bible is? The church. The Jewish canon we have here that's called the Hebrew Bible, that's not set down in stone until the year 100 AD. After the church has already been around for 70 years using the Greek Old Testament Bible called the Septuagint, which has, quote, the full 7 extra books.
That was going to be my question. So the Septuagint is the Catholic Christian Old Testament,
Yes.
essentially. Thank you. That clears up.